No. Just trying to open my jar. It's hard to open. Open. Why don't you open? It's on my face. Paint's on my face. I'm trying to make stars, but now paint's on my face.
Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is definitely a longer video than usual because the spread actually gets very involved. So let's get into it. I decided that April was gonna be galaxy/planets aesthetic pretty early on. It's a classic aesthetic for things I have given my tendency to put crescent moons on everything I have. And I've always liked cooler colors over warmer tones. It's also because of the student club I'm part of, referred to in my university as an org, has a really big event in March that I was in charge of planning, so I wanted this to also be a reference to that because the event is space-ish themed. Before I actually get into the cover page designing, there's a lot of prep that I need to do for this month's spreads. I use my black washi tape to outline the edges of the cover page so I'd be able to paint it without danger of going past the sides. I take the whitest brush I own and some black acrylic paint and just paint the entire page black. I tried to make it as opaque as I can, but the paper already started to warp. So that's gonna be something I'd have to deal with moving forward. This is 180 GSM paper, so I thought that it could handle this much paint given the metallic paint I've used on other covers before. I put a scrap piece of paper in between the pages after I painted it and set it aside under something heavy to try to press it flat again. I take some pieces of scrap cardstock that I've used for my habit trackers in the old planner and cut them into more manageable pieces. I paint them with the black paint so I wouldn't have to paint directly on the notebook, especially if I wanted shapes with sharper edges. These were also made with thicker paper than my bullet journal, which could stand more water before they warped, but even these started curling upwards while drying. After the pieces were dry, I still used the still white backs of the paper to measure and trace out the tops of the weekly spreads I was planning to make. It was super helpful to use the dots on the page to help me mark out where I was going to cut. I make sure to label the back of these for easy reference. I did the same thing for the right side of the page. I decided on having these two headers separate because having them connected with that thick cardstock would make the bullet journal really hard to close or stay on one page. This is the part where I go back and repaint some more cardstock. I was only able to make enough headers for 3 weeklies and this month is going to have 4 weekly spreads. To actually save myself some time before I painted them, I already measured what pieces I would need to cut out so I wouldn't have to go back and forth every time I'd miss a piece. After they're painted, I just cut them out and set them aside. The next prep thing I did starts with bringing out this scrap of 1/8 illustration board I've been keeping around, and another piece of cardstock. I put colors on the illustration board and use that to make random splashes of colors on the paper. Just to point out a mistake I made for you guys to learn from, I used a yellowish green and mixed it with blue. Then it looked really bad. It turned super dark, and when I added white, it just turned gray. That's because you're not supposed to do that with those paints. Let me explain. A warm tone green means it's leaning more on the yellows and a cool tone means it's leaning more on the blue, at least for green. It's super bad to use warm tone greens and a blue together because they're both heading in opposite directions of the color wheel, giving you a super muddy looking color. So I looked through my collection to find a cool tone green and mix it with white and blue, which gave me the nicer looking color that I was looking for. It also coordinates more with the cool tone palette I'm using. There you go, mini art lesson over. Last minute, I decided to add some pink into the mix for an extra pop. I also want to point out that I'm using a cool tone red to make the pink, that's why it doesn't clash with the other colors I'm using. To help me with blending the other colors, I take a tissue and wipe some of the colors together. Now we kinda jump to the cover page for a bit. I wanted a galaxy nebula looking thingy going across both pages, so I start with the light green in the upper left corner and use my tissue to blend it out. I go through with my light blue, then my dark blue. Not really using swiping motions, just tap the color in with my brush so I wouldn't have hard edges. While the paint's still wet, you can put the color in there to overlap and blend them together. I just tweak how white each color is while I go. I use a dark purple after the dark blue to help transition towards the pastel purple to the pink. It's a lot more jarring to see a dark blue turn into a pastel purple, then back into a dark purple, then from dark purple to pink, especially since my purple paint is actually very blue, which helps gives it a nicer fade. The tissue fade galaxy technique was something I made for myself in high school when we had an art exhibit that was galaxy themed, so I've gotten a lot of experience doing it already, so don't feel bad if you're trying this and it doesn't end up as nice as you wanted it to be. Making gradients takes a lot of practice. We let that dry and now we jump back to more prep. I didn't like how muddy the colors look on that first pass, so I'm using the back of the white cardstock for a second chance. Instead of trying to layer the colors and fading them together, I just put the colors on the paper randomly, but making sure their overlap is minimal just to help the color transitions. It makes the colors look more like their actual tones rather than influencing each other too much. I do that 2 more times, emphasizing colors I haven't used much in the other times, like having more areas of pink and green. Because we're working with a lot of painted things, we have to keep jumping from task to task while stuff is drying. We open to the habit tracker page, and I just tuck a piece of paper under the page to supposedly prevent the paint from transferring to other pages. I tried using a black marker to make a boundary line around the habit tracker circle so I wouldn't have to risk painting around it. But it wasn't opaque enough, so I resorted to outlining it with paint anyway. When the outline's done, I can just paint the rest of the page black. If any of you were wondering, I didn't use the black tape around the edges because the title is gonna look different if the half of it was over the tape and half of it was over paint. When that's dry, I immediately do the galaxy thingies. Instead of going for a gradient, I make it in sparse sections where some colors overlap, then use the same tissue technique to make them look more faded. While that's drying, I move on to the purpose of these colorful papers. I take 3 sizes of circles and start tracing them onto the back. These are going to be the planets. Because I didn't plan out the colors for each paper, the planets ended up looking really cool. I do the same thing on another paper. I made a lot more small planets because they're a lot easier to fit into places where I need them. Jump to a different day, did some work off camera, sketching some titles. I get my good white paint and water it down. I just tap the brush to make the stars in the galaxy. Quick tip, if you want small dots like I have here, make sure to not put too much paint on your brush before you start tapping. That's how I got the big dot in the middle of the spread. I also added papers around me because the white paint was splashing everywhere. Another way to make the stars is the toothbrush flick, but I didn't want to do that this time because I had to touch the paint and I didn't have gloves for that day. I do the same with all the headers, just splashing a bit of white paint on them. Then I do it on the habit tracker too. Just making sure I don't add too much in the blank circle because that'll prevent me from actually coloring it in. I start with one of the header pieces and some silver paint. I just paint in the thing I sketched out before and keep adding layers until it becomes opaque because silver paint takes a lot of layers. I also sorted out the header pieces depending on where they were going to be placed. For more title painting, I start painting the cover page title. I mix the same mint green shade I used to paint the galaxy, maybe even a bit lighter than the original. I set that aside while I paint in the main letters with silver paint. The difficulty with using metallic paint is that the reflectiveness makes it hard to see the paint when it's uneven. After a lot of coats, I move on to the green paint. Using a reference, I paint it in such a way that the green looks like the shadow of the original text. Then I keep alternating coats on the shadow and the letters as I go. I also put more coats on the other title. Now we actually get to making the spreads, after how many minutes? I just start arranging the planets onto the page. I try to make sure that the colors on the background aren't the same ones on the planet, so that they stand out a little bit more, even if I use the same colors. I use a combination of a glue stick and glue tape to stick the planets onto the cover. Then I take some of my white paint and make larger stars by just making an X. So yeah, that's all the things I had to do to finish this fully painted cover. For the monthly, I finally added the header I was painting before and added the same larger stars. Before I stick the other header on, I designed it by adding some planets onto the header, keeping it more fun. I added a small nebula with the leftover green paint and a comet for my silver paint. I just stuck that on with double-sided tape because I don't think glue stick is strong enough to hold it on. I start differently than I usually do when I add the washi tape first on the calendar. Then I make the lines of the calendar using a dark purple pen. It's the same width as my last 2 calendars. I add the same black line of washi tape on the bottom of the page. To save on tape, I use half of the tape to add it to the other side. Because I would have some extra green paint, I use that to write the day label so I wouldn't waste it. After a quick break, I use a lighter purple pen to make the numbers. I make a little bit of space for my color codes, then use my washi tapes to make a design on the bottom of the page to take up some space. I'm going to show you the first weekly I made. I'm just doing the same format as my time-based weekly but with a different theme. I start with the corner calendar, dark purple at the top, then light purple for the numbers. I use a more bluish purple highlighter to indicate which week it is to help separate the shade from the color of the pen. I stick the headers on using double-sided tape and start decorating them using the planets in paint. I like how the comet turned out, so I used the silver paint for that too. I also added the green nebula back. Just a quick drawing in of the notes section in dark purple, and I used the light purple to make the time frames. Pens wouldn't really work well on a painted surface, so I used silver paint to make the day labels. To keep that separation between the design and the planning part, I add a colored washi on the top part just to trim it using my cutter. I added the day labels with a white pen, which I then forgot later on and used white paint instead. As you're seeing me make the rest of the weeklies in the same style, here are some life updates. I can honestly tell you guys that I'm currently overwhelmed with work. There were certain things I had to handle for the past few weeks that has really eaten up my time. It's something I've committed myself to, so I didn't want to stop working on it just because I had my academics to worry about. I even had to break my rule of no work after midnight many times because of the amount of work I have assigned to me by my subjects, while also addressing everything in that commitment I was talking about. Having to attend to stuff for it was honestly causing me a little bit of backlog in my work, which I'm trying to address now to questionable results. I think my backlog is also partly due to my really ambitious projects, not just for my studies but for the channel as well. I kept changing the upload schedule of certain videos because I thought of a better one in its place, even if that means that I have to shoot another video from scratch when I have something that's like 70% done. Don't worry, you'll see both of those videos in due time, just not in the order of shooting. Then with that, I'm also juggling shooting videos like 2 weeks in advance because it was a cool time to showcase what I'm doing. I know I said a lot for myself to do. Last thing is my academics. I think I'm doing decently with the output I've made, but it doesn't help when things keep getting stacked on me all the time. I have some subjects with modules that take about 2 hours to finish because I'm also taking notes and answering essays, but I also have to attend 2 1.5-hour class meetings every week, and we go through a module a meeting. The topics are interesting, but sometimes it just really stacks on the schedule. Not to mention forum-style posts, activities, and papers. I think that would be okay for a normal load, but that sucks when you have to mix it in with another subject that requires you to pass 2 outputs per week, one of which is supposed to be designed and also graded for appearance. While the class is supposed to be 3 units, which is 3 hours of lecture a week, they use 1.5 hours for a recap lecture, but the asynchronous modules themselves take at least 3 hours to finish by their estimates, which means it takes a normal student at least double the time, taking into account the buffering of the video, unclear language, internet problems, and procrastination. Then you have to do your 2 outputs separate from that time. That's just 2 of my subjects for the semester, and I have 4 more. Okay, rant over, let's go back to my bullet journal. To help me differentiate between the pages of the weekly, I take a color that I use for the planets and use that as a little divider between the header designs and the timed portion. So I have a green, a blue, a purple, and a pink. I use the header to help trim them to the right size. I also add this tape on the right side to bring in more color. I go back to my monthly and start adding the black washi around the edges. I do the same to the weeklies, covering the top and bottom. When possible, I use the same piece of tape cut in half so I save on tape. I add this little border to still give that spacey background while making it possible for me to still use it as a planner without having to resort to painting all the pages, and especially with all the edges. Now for the habit tracker. I wanted to go back to the circle style I used in February because I have planets and the design looks like rings or orbital patterns or star maps, so it's perfect for an application like this. I traced out the circles with a light purple pen, then used a gray pen to make the lines. To make sure I have enough divisions, I put the lines down with pencil first and traced them in gray. I actually had to add an extra space where I could because I skipped on using 1/8 of the circle so I can add the label. I stick the smallest size of planet in the middle to make room for the smallest space. I was supposed to paint this with silver paint like the rest of the titles, but I decided on using white because it's more opaque and it will save me some time. I still have to do a couple passes though to get to the level that I want. The design of the page just involves me sticking a few planets and adding the stars. Since I already have the nebulas in the background, I add the labels with a light blue pen. For the exercise and sleep tracker, I really like the same format I've been using but with added elements to add some designs to the sides. So I take one of the headers I made earlier and just add a planet on either side and paint in the words. Completely forgetting that I have a white paint that I can do the same job with but better. I stack the headers on with glue tape, but I use my double-sided tape to stick onto design bars on the side. Then add the smaller planets and stars. Then we do the same old adding the numbers to each tracker. I used a purple pen for this time, then the box was with the smoke blue pen. The color key is still at the side. Like the spreads before it, I added a border with black tape on the bottom, but I didn't put it on the top for this one because I already had my painted headers. Now, this isn't something you'd see in a normal plan with me, but I decided to add it because I needed it made for myself. As you can see, I'm finally using a white pen to write the words watch tracker. I don't know if you guys know how many shows I watch. It's slowing down right now because of school, but it's still growing. I stick those onto the page, then I go with a super simple table design like the one I made in my 2021 setup. I decided to make it a 2-page spread this time without a lot of the design element of the first one so I can maximize the space for more entries. I number the entries continuing the numbering of the last table so by the end of the year I can tell how many shows and movies I've watched in total. I sped this part of the footage up super fast because this is just me making lines with a gray pen. The columns just have name, type, start date, and end date. For type, I have 3 categories right now: ongoing show, binge show, and movie. I have a lot of shows that I watch weekly, which you can see on my filled-in spreads. That's called an ongoing show. Then there are binge shows that I can watch at my own pace. I just need a distinction because I want to know my watching pace, and not knowing the difference kind of skews that a little bit. Quick border of black tape for that, then let's jump to the wallpaper. This video is getting pretty long, so let's do this. I was super inspired after seeing these bright space illustrations online. So I wanted to make these for myself and really try to challenge my skills. I start by making the background and make a little squiggly thing to make the shapes. I didn't like my original version, so I made another one which I like a lot better. Then I layered the same shapes on top of each other, and the colors I take directly from my reference. To make the planet, I had to do a bit of adjusting to make sure that it was all covered. Then I warped it to make it look like a 3D planet. I make that my main planet, then start working on more planets. I make a simpler and smaller blue planet to place above it. To give it the same feel as the reference photos, I add an outer glow effect to each of them depending on their main color. I had a bit of a hard time trying to make the shooting star by just trimming the gradient I made earlier. I decided on making a compound shape using a circle and a rectangle. Was having a few screen recording issues when I made this, so I didn't have footage of me making the color shapes for the comment. Because one of the colors is purple, it was easier to work with outside of the artboard. I wanted to have a rough edge instead of the line when the rectangle ends, so I separated the last color and made it a clipping mask with the other colors. Put the last color on top of that and just trimmed it to fit. Just did a quick warp effect just to make sure it curves instead of actually trying to make the shape curved originally. Then I just add the same outer glow effect I did for the planets. I added another planet and I wanted to try making a ring around that planet. I basically just take a section of the gradient and make it cut around the planet. There's a bunch of tutorials for it on YouTube and I suggest you watch those if you want to see how it's done because my recording issues happened again and I didn't get footage of me making it. I added another small planet in that time. For the calendar, I used the same font as the one I tried to emulate in my spread. So for the month label, it's the same style as the one on my cover. I just add the numbers like you've probably seen me do every month. So here's my wallpaper and spreads for April. If you've gotten to this point of the video, thank you so much for watching. This video took a lot longer than my previous entries because of the prep I needed to do, but I hope you guys like the spreads this month. What do you think of the spreads? Any suggestions for monthly themes? Leave them in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos from me, then hit the subscribe button and the bell to know when a new video is out. I try to upload every week, Monday nights at 8. I guess that's all for this video. Bye guys!